Okay, so as we've got headphones, can everybody hear me? Yeah, good. So I wanted to start today with a question. Show of hands, who travelled here today? Okay, so deliberately stupid question, right? I presume none of you live here. So I wanted to ask a question where everybody had to answer yes, because it's a good example of consumer decision making and consumer behaviour, because three things broadly happened. Some of you went, he asked a question, I'll answer it. Most of you sort of looked a bit nervously left to right before putting your hand up. A load of you sat with your arms crossed saying, I'm not going to answer this idiot's question, right? And that works really well because we can use those three groupings to help understand consumer behavior. So the first people that put their hands up, they're individually motivated, okay? Now in reality, the three groups I'm going to go through, that's all of us in every context, but to keep it easy, we'll just say one group. So these people act on their own individual behavior. That's about 6 to 8% of us. Okay, so really not many of us actually act on our own accord. What most of us like to do is copy, okay? And we have a threshold of copying. So for a lot of people, they were able to look around the room, they were able to see others put their hand up and their threshold was met. And then you get people whose threshold wasn't met. These people sat there with their arms folded, okay? Now why that becomes interesting, because when we start to think about customer quality, we can take a different lens on this, because the first group, type 1, who act on their own accords, they're really easy to activate, okay? So D2C brands, when they start, they do really well in social because of this, because they can hit this 6 to 8%. Doesn't scale very well. And if you can get them, everyone else can get them. If we look at type 3, the metaphorical arms folding, if you can have those as part of your customer base, they're not going to be taken by your competition that easily. They're going to act as the cornerstone for your brand, which means you've got a much more defensible position. So for the next 10 or so minutes, I'm going to talk about consumer behavior, consumer decision making, and importantly, how we can use that within our marketing. So the first question is, why do we need to think differently about audiences? I presume most of you are doing some form of advertising today. You've already got an audience definition. You'll have your own versions of this, but we kind of hear time and time again about people struggling to cut through the noise, struggling to reach new audiences, or struggling to build audiences that are profitable. And for me, that's just symptomatic of we're not reaching the right people. And if we look at how we build audiences today, there's different ways, but this is one you'll all be very familiar with. We look at our customer base, we look at a section of our customer base, we find something that looks very kind of groups together our customers in a way that makes me want to find more of them, and we go and target them. And this is flawed in two ways. Firstly, everyone in your category is doing this. If you sell pet food, then you're all trying to find people who are likely to buy pet food, so your competitors are going to try and do the same thing. Secondly, it doesn't really take into account how we make decisions, back to my opening example. So how do we make decisions? What does influence our buying behavior? So I've got two brands here. I've got the RSPCA in green and Dogs Trust in red. The RSPCA green because they're a customer of ours. Dogs Trust are in red, not because I don't like them, but it's just they're not our customer. If you want to play along, put your own brand in green, put your biggest competitor in red. But what we've got here is a scenario where we've got a person in the middle who is undecided, but they're being heavily influenced by people who are talking about Dogs Trust. We'll come back to the influence point. Now this person isn't impossible for the RSPCA to convert. Think back to my 6 to 8% example, but not the statistical chance is low, but actually the chance of keeping them is even lower. Okay, they're not going to stay a customer for long. If we take the same scenario, but the individuals are being influenced positively, we've got a much better chance of converting them, great, but more importantly, we've got a much better chance of keeping them for the long term, so in terms of profitability of the customer. Both category correct audiences, but one is going to perform much better than the other. Now, it's at this point, I think everyone thinks I'm just talking about word of mouth, right? And it's much more than that. I don't think anyone would argue that word of mouth is good. I certainly wouldn't, but we don't talk about brands as much as brands like to think we do, okay? So it's hugely valuable if you can get it, but relying on it isn't what we need to do. I'm really talking about social influence, and in this context, I'm talking about real world social, not social media. I'll give you an example. If one of my friends walks into a pub on a Friday night with a new set of trainers, new brand, I may not say something, but subconsciously there's a seed planted for that new brand. When I'm dropping the kids at school, a few days later, I see one of the dads wearing the same brand of trainers. Subconsciously, there's a form of reinforcement. If I'm in the gym a few days later, under the bench in the changing rooms, I see the same brand. Again, we get the point of reinforcement. Running for trains, all these examples, the more we see this, the more we're being influenced. This is happening all over the world, every minute of every day, and it is powerful, but actually when it becomes really powerful is when you can accelerate that. Because what we're trying to do, what you want to do is tap into that motion and show someone an ad and they say, oh yeah, they're the trainers that I keep seeing everywhere, I've been meaning to buy them, right? So we're trying to find those people who've been positively influenced. And this is why a lot of campaigns don't necessarily perform as well as they should do. If you think back to we had our red and green audiences before, got this nice big circle in the middle, which is our target audience we've defined. Now, what that audience is going to do is going to hit a bunch of people who are already positively influenced with you. There's also going to hit a bunch of people who are never going to buy from you. They're always going to buy from the competition. That's bad enough, but actually the bigger crime is on the right-hand side, is missing the people who could buy from you, but they're outside your scope. Because they've been positively influenced, they're much more likely to buy. That could be a new audience, that could be someone outside your normal tradition. So to summarize the behavioral science piece, really what I've talked about there is we don't like rational information, which is slightly ironic because I've been throwing rational information at you for the last 7 minutes, but we do like to copy, which creates herd mentality, which really creates clusters primed for your advertising. So the next piece is really to talk about geo, because I think when I talk about being at home, seeing all these things around me, people think, is geo still really relevant in 2025 when we spend our world living on our phones? But actually it's surprising how much of our time we do spend in a relatively small place. So I'm sure many Roy Sutherland fans here, in his book Transport for Humans, he states that 60% of journeys are under 5 miles. Okay, so we spend most of our time very close to where we live. To illustrate how small 5 miles is, this is where I live, zoomed in, 5 miles looks quite considerable. When I zoom out, it's tiny. Now, I know it's criminal to be in Manchester and not have Manchester on the map, that's only because as I zoomed out, my blue circle turned to a dot, okay, to show how small it is. When I tried to do it on a global scale, it was a pinprick, so the point was lost. The point I'm trying to make here is, despite I spend a lot of time all over the place, statistically, I spend most time in that small area. So when we talk about local reinforcement, it's not that we're not going to see new things, when we're traveling around. The point is, if we need to see things multiple times, we're going to see it more often where we spend the most time, which is why geography is really important. And this isn't just me making it up, so let's look at how Facebook did it. So Facebook were not the first social media network in 2004. Now, if they'd maybe taken the playbook of today, what they probably would have done is looked at their first few subscribers and said, hey, we're a really big hit with college students. Let's go and raise £100 million and we're just going to target North America, people who look like college students, and see how many we can get to acquire and come on as a customer. I'd argue if they did that, we'd all still be using MySpace today rather than the breakouts from their products. But what they did, and this part of the story is relatively famous, is they concentrated heavily on one college where it was founded, but they really played the local social network. So they used the offline social networks, offline social influence that got people inviting their friends. Now these are students, they've come from all across North America, all across the world. They're still inviting their friends at other colleges. They didn't let anyone who received an invite join in, because they knew if they let other people join, then they would have that fizzle out and they wouldn't come back. They waited till they had a critical mass. Next one was Columbia. Acceleration now starts because we've got 2 colleges inviting their friends from all over the place, which means we get to critical mass number 3, which was Stanford, and much quicker, and the story continues. I'm not going to go through every one of their schools because that would be here for the next hour, but the point you can see, we got to there, and then they hit their critical mass and they let everybody accept it, log on. Same with Twitter, it's not just Facebook. So I think if we look at a Twitter adoption map, then you can see it's going to look like an amorphous blob. But again, it was stories of local communities after communities after communities. They didn't just try and go after everybody. It was spread through those offline networks. Now that's all very well if you're a social media network and you can see these connections on the back end of your system. What do you do if you're not one of those? Well, briefly, Herdify can help. We're not the only answer. It's not a big product pitch. We effectively detect where these pockets of offline social influence exist. I'm going to say it twice. We don't use social media data. There's no social media listening. How we do it is effectively pandemic modeling turned upside down. I can't do this slide justice in 15 seconds, but if you can model the spread of a virus between two people, you can model the spread of influence, which is effectively what we're doing. In terms of how it looks, customers, we generally see, so Abel and Cole here, we saw a big jump in their response rates and their CPA reductions. But more importantly, they're being pushed to drive profitability. So the customers that come from these communities, these offline social influence, buy more often and spend more. So as we come into the downhill stretch, we don't like to be rational. We like to cluster. Herdify can find them. But I'm going to give you 3 tips for you to walk away with if you don't have to buy us to do this. So the first one is think connected customers. Gyms are getting really good at this. Long gone are the days where we would sign up for a gym membership in January, forget about it, they keep quiet, and then you'd realize 2 years later, right? If people aren't going, they stop paying. So gyms know they have to get people to come to the gyms now. They also know that if you train with a friend, you're more likely to train for longer. So gyms are trying to incentivize people to train together. If you have a product for a single person, then you might have to get creative here, but if you can incentivize people using the product together, you're going to increase that strength that we're talking about here. This isn't about referral, that's about getting people to buy. This is about reinforcement while people are using it. Think local to become national. Rory famously tried to convince BT to rebrand as BT Kent and BT Surrey. I'm not suggesting you do regional rebranding, but we know that when things are presented to us regionally that they resonate more. So be that with copy, be that with events. And reinforcement, reinforcement, reinforcement. How do we make sure that all your customers using the product see other people using the product many, many times? So for example, if you sponsor a music festival in the summer and everyone's together, when they distribute back to their own homes and their own areas, how do you ensure that they still see that reinforcement when they're there? Otherwise, all the good work you've done at the festival, as an example, will be wasted. So lastly, thank you for listening. If you do want a copy of the slides, there's a QR code available. And just to go full circle, because I talked about the 3 different types of groups we have. So if you were in the metaphorical group of, hand up types place, then come and speak to us. We're on the picnic table over there. If you're in the metaphorical, looking around the room, not sure what to do, go and speak to your media agency. We work with a large number of media agencies across the UK, so go and talk to them. If you're metaphorically sitting there with your arm folders thinking this is nonsense, go and read some YouTube. You can't read YouTube yet. Go and read some books from Damon Santola or watch his YouTube videos. He's a sociologist out in North America who talks about what we do. I've been Tom Ridges. Thank you very much for listening.